Hi, I'm Professor Green, and let's keep talking about Chapter 16. This is now Part 2, a typical distribution system. And so what does it look like? When my girlfriend Nicole, when she creates a perfume from Calvin Klein or Vera Wang, how does it actually get to somebody around the world? So first they, if they're manufacturing inside the country, then it'll go to a wholesale distributor and then or a retail distributor, and then to the final customer. If they're manufacturing outside the country, they go to it, right? Import agent, as we've spoken about earlier in this course. Then it goes to the wholesale distributor, the retail distributor, and the final customer. But if they don't have to export it, then it will go directly to those two distributors or maybe directly to the customer. So pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything surprising in this idea, but just to lay it out so that we're all on the same page. The differences between countries is that we see sometimes either a concentrated system where few retailers supply most of the market. This is often in more developed countries, and then a fragmented system where there are many retailers, none of which has a major share of the market. And we'll talk the next couple of slides about this because it can be so different, right? So my girlfriend getting perfume out to people in India is very different than getting this perfume out to people here in Los Angeles. A fragmented system is also common where we have like a large population density and where urban centers have developed before the car came along. And you think Japan in this situation, these are more small stores and where people can walk easily, or India, right, where there are 600,000 rural villages. And then there's greater retail in developed countries because we have more cars, where there are more freezers and refrigerators in the home. And we have more two-income families with more spending capability. These are things like Walmart's and Carrefour, etc. Carrefour is the large superstore of France. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, as I said, in these next couple of chapters. We're also going to talk about channel length. So, right, the distribution channel, right, from the producer to the end user. So the number of intermediaries between the producer and the consumer. When the producer sells directly to the consumer, the channel is very short. But when you sell through an import agent, as we saw 2 slides ago, or a wholesaler or a retailer, the channel can make this very, very long. Again, think India getting it to these 600,000 rural villages. Fragmented, longer channels, especially in Japan too, right? As I said, because they have smaller stores, and that the entry of large discount superstores is shortening the channel length in some countries. I just said, like Walmart, because Walmart is coming to so many countries, or Tesco. I just got back from the Czech Republic, and Tesco is everywhere. So the differences between countries is now continued on this slide. Talking about channel exclusivity. What is that? This is where this is a channel where it's difficult for outsiders to access the channel. Retailers usually prefer to carry products from established manufacturers. Again, Japan, India, they have such a long channel, people that they know, they've done this for decades, same shops, same distributors, etc. They trust those people, right? There's especially in Japan, a whole lot of trust and relationships are so important. And so it can be really difficult for people to break in. And so what does an organization do if that's the issue? We'll talk about that in a slide or two. We also want to talk about, before we get to that, channel quality. So this is because you're already probably thinking like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get my perfume to that small village in India? Because it's hard to break in. Right. And I don't know those people. It's hard. So we're depending on now the expertise, competency, and skills of established retailers and their ability to sell and support the products of international businesses, right? When you go to buy a product, so often you do depend on the knowledge and expertise of the salesperson. the quality of retailers is good in most developed countries, right? So we can depend on these people, but it's variable at best in emerging markets and less developed countries. So if you've, again, ever been to any of these developed countries, go to these small shops, does the person really know the difference between all the different soaps? Does the person really know all the differences between different types of electronics? So a poor quality channel can impede the market entry. You definitely don't want to necessarily send a product out there, like a perfume or something from P&G, consumer good, and making sure that it's, and you want to make sure that it's supported on every step of the way to get to the user. And so what Apple did when they entered a lot of these countries is that they started their own distribution channels, right? They opened up their own stores, and we'll talk about them again in a couple of slides. But right, you go to so many countries, you see an Apple store because they felt they wanted to be the ones responsible for educating people about their products, not depending on somebody else to do that. And so you go to the UK, France, et cetera, and they all have Apple stores. So how do you choose a distribution strategy? It depends on the relative costs and benefits of each alternative, which makes a lot of sense, right? Each intermediary, each person, each organization along the channel adds its own markup. So there's a link between a channel length, right, and the final selling price and profit margin. So if you choose a long channel, which you might have to in India, you might not make as much money because it is so long if you pay people along the way. If price is important, a shorter channel obviously is better. So no surprise that a lot of organizations will choose Walmart, or you see these fragrances now showing up in Costco because they can make a lot of money, like make more money as opposed to going through Bloomingdale's and a distributor and many other steps along the way. If a retail sector is very fragmented, then a long channel is better. So if there are 600,000 villages with different tastes and preferences, then you want to make sure that you have a longer channel to make sure that you're getting it to the right people. You might consider less traditional alternatives to gain market access. And I love this idea of Tibet. Sometimes products are carried on the backs of humans to get to these small villages. So also another example is Apple, when they initially had set up distribution channels in new countries, sometimes they did partner with established electronics companies in those countries to get respect from the people and to get, as we spoken about already in this course, to get local know-how on the consumer. So they partnered with people like Brother, Mitsubishi, Sharp, Minolta in Japan. And then they also opened up their own store to help support that. But they, kind of hedged their bets there because they wanted to make sure that they were reaching the customer in the right way. So now we'll talk a little bit about communication channels, the first and biggest one being social media, because social media actually affects all the other three, right? Even if you have direct selling, sales, promotion, and other forms of advertising, you're still these days going to have a social media channels. Really great success story is how Burberry changed their image. That maybe 15 years ago, Burberry was taking a nosedive when it came to sales and respect and reputation. It was kind of a stodgy, if you kind of a traditional brand, and young people didn't really want to wear it. And they hired a CEO that was very hip and young, and she decided then that they would have create a huge social media campaign. And she really upped the stakes and hired people who were professionals in this world to make it look like Burberry is much more hip than it had been traditionally. They used young supermodels like Kate Moss to get into their brand, et cetera, and it really succeeded. They also changed the licensing agreements because, as we read earlier in this textbook, that the licensees were kind of getting away with a lot of stuff, creating new products with their brand name on it that were not of good quality and not really in line with the vision of Burberry. And then eventually they opened up more retail stores of their own and had more control over over their product. So a really good success story of how they work their communication channels, because their product was pretty similar up until recently. They did change the product. Well, now it's less of that houndstooth check and more of traditional products. But it's really just the communication channels that shifted. So now talking about barriers to international communication, what could go wrong? Anything and everything, right? Which is why you should hire an international business consultant to help you. Cultural barriers. It can make it difficult to communicate messages across cultures, develop cross-cultural literacy to combat this. That's exactly what he's saying, the author, right, is to make sure that you understand what the messages are. And that goes back to that example of that huge advertisement that Benetton started in the United States of an African-American or someone Black breastfeeding a white baby. And they just wanted to show that, you know, Benetton was all different types of colors. That's their motto, right? The many colors of Benetton. But it backfired because in the United States, it's kind of taboo to show women breastfeeding, while abroad that's very mainstream. Source and country of origin effects. First, we talk about source effect, when the receiver of the message evaluates it based on status or image of the sender. This is an example of in Japan in the 1990s. There was a little bit of Japan bashing. It was kind of a backlash to World War II. And I remember this with my, I was 17, 18 in the early 1990s, and my dad wanted to buy a new car. And he ended up buying a Honda. But a lot of people were saying, oh, no, I wouldn't buy a Japanese car. And I was always kind of like looking around like, why wouldn't we buy a Japanese car? They're great cars. But in his generation, they were still feeling the effects of World War II, right? My dad was born right before World War II started. He lived through it. And so, and maybe we were jealous. The United States was jealous of the Japanese car industry taking over the American one. And so when I was a teenager, people would say, oh, I want to buy American. And so what Honda did was they had a whole communications shift and made it seem like Honda was much more American. They told them that they have, plants, factories here in the United States. They made it, their ads were, with Americans. I just remember this so clearly, like Honda tried to become like an American brand, even though they're really Asian. So the next one is country of origin effects, the extent to which the place of manufacturing influences the product evaluation. So again, that's the similar idea. And then the noise levels, the number of messages competing for potential consumers' attention. And in this country, the noise is very high, as you can see. You step out your door, you're hit with advertisements. You go online, you can see hundreds of millions of advertisements at any point in time. Push versus pull strategy, not only to advertisements, but selection of goods, right? If you go to a developed country and you go to a store, it's not as big of a selection. Push versus pull strategies. A push strategy here emphasizes personal selling, and a pull strategy emphasizes mass media advertising. So sometimes I think that, how do billboards still exist? Why would anybody, invest in a billboard? Because it just goes out to this huge audience, and you're not at all targeting it to the person who's reading it. But there's still, people that do it, and there's obviously people that are buying because of these billboards. So how do you, the factors that affect this decision: the product type and consumer sophistication, channel length, and media availability. We're going to talk on the next couple of slides about each of these. So the first one is product type and consumer sophistication. Again, if you're a marketing major, this is, something that you'll deep dive into. We're just going to cover it kind of somewhat superficially today in an international context. So these are firms that sell consumer goods to a large market segment. They prefer a pull strategy for cost advantages. This is talking about, if there's a low literacy rate, for example, you want to make sure that you appeal to, they're not very sophisticated, then you can't really have a lot of words on your advertisement, and then you need to have maybe more pictures. Firms that sell industrial products or makers of other complex products favor a push strategy to help educate the consumers. So it's all about making sure that people get educated and they understand more about your product. Then we talk about channel length here. The longer the channel, the more intermediaries are involved. It can be expensive to use direct selling to push a product through many layers of the distribution channel because you have to educate each person, each intermediary on the product. A firm may try to pull its product through the channels by using mass advertising to create consumer demand. And so that's when you show a billboard, and then the consumer then knows about the product, and then they kind of look for the product and seek the product out. Obviously, it's more efficient to have a shorter channel, but often hard to get through the longer channel, as we said, in Japan and India. And then the last one is media availability. A pull strategy relies on access to advertising media. Maybe they don't have a smartphone, or maybe they don't drive and see billboards on the road. A push strategy is more attractive when there's limited access to mass media. This is very often in developing countries where there are fewer options, or also different regulations. I think that's a big piece of this. I didn't know until recently, actually, last couple of years when I did my master's in communication, that did you know that the US is actually the only country that allows pharmaceutical ads to go directly to the consumer? Every other country in the world thinks that only the doctor can acknowledge and understand the information that is coming through in a pharmaceutical ad. And they don't think that, that the end user should be making these evaluations, and they should be relying on the expertise of the doctor to tell them what type of medicine to take. It makes a lot of sense, right? So why did the United States feel that all of a sudden the end user can make these decisions and then go back to their doctor and ask for a specific pharmaceutical product? Sounds like a lot of lobbying to me from the pharmaceutical industry. So we have, we want to use a push strategy for industrial products or complex new products so that you can educate the end consumer. We can, when distribution channels are short, and you don't have to educate so many people along the way, and when few print or electronic media are available. Also, we use pull strategies for consumer goods products when distribution channels are long, and when sufficient print and electronic media are available to carry the marketing message. Let's do one more slide and then we'll take a break. For our last slide, we're going to talk about why you would do standard advertising and why you would not do standard advertising. So, an organization, like Benetton or Marlboro, we'll just talk about in a minute, why they can, why would they want to take one ad and have it across the world, or why would they want to then not have that and divide it up into different segments around the world? So obviously for standardized industries, there's significant economic advantages, right? There's an example that one of the ad agencies says they have saved Coca-Cola millions of dollars in coming up with ads out of Atlanta, out of their US headquarters, that the same ad can be used around the world. And so they create that ad with that idea in mind. This idea, with the Coke can, with recognizing that is a human issue, that people want to emotionally connect to others. They want to express themselves. So that is not necessarily something by culture. And so they went with this campaign and they did well, right? Same campaign all around the world, very, very successful. Some people argue, I found this kind of a weak argument personally, because I know a lot of people who are very creative, But they say that creative talent actually is scarce. So one large effort to develop a campaign will be more successful than many smaller efforts. Not sure about that, but I do know that there's a lot of money that goes into creating a campaign. That's for sure. Brand names are global, and that, yes, Coca-Cola is recognized all around the world, and so why not have the same campaign? But a lot of people say that their standard advertising it doesn't work, that these cultural differences among nations are significant, right? Nokia went this route, as we'll discuss. Oh, there's going to be one more slide. Nokia, when they existed, they've now been brought out by Microsoft, so maybe they spent a lot of money on this, but they had advertising campaigns for almost each individual country. And I always thought that was super interesting because as I traveled to each country, I'd see totally different ads. And I was like, is that the same product or not? And it was, but they just felt like they needed to really customize it to get, to the heart of the consumer. Also, country differences in advertising regulations also block the implementation of standardized advertising. And pharmaceuticals, right, as we see, can advertise directly to the consumer in the United States, but nowhere else around the world. Also, another one that shows up is in France, no kids are allowed in product endorsements. I thought that was so interesting, right? Because you see kids in product endorsements here in the United States all the time. So let's do one last slide. Dealing with country differences. Some features may be in all advertising campaigns, while other features are localized. So you might have one piece that is the same and other pieces that are different. This can allow for cost savings, building up brand recognition, customization to different cultures. The Marlboro Man is, an ad that we can't not talk about, right? That idea of, that guy on the horse, it just became such a huge idea for people in the 1970s and 80s to smoke cigarettes. And that was actually, didn't need to be changed in country to country, even though that's just an American idea. So really interesting. And as you can see, a lot of talent that goes into creating these ads. Let's go ahead and stop here and I'll come back in video 3 with the pricing strategy.